This video is going to replace class that we would have had on Friday, but with the bad weather approaching, I didn't want you guys being out on the roads, and I didn't want to be out on the roads myself. I have a long commute, okay? So chapter 5 is an important one. Well, it's going to lay the foundation for things we're going to talk about throughout the course, and that's on Agile development. So Agile development is one of the design methodologies. It differs from the prescriptive methodologies we talked about last time, like the waterfall model. And even, what's pretty popular in the world today are the unified process, where we've seen that with the UML diagrams of various sorts, okay? That's still a big thing. And that's more of the heavyweight approach. And then Agile development has become the lighter weight approach. And you certainly can combine those two. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the book chapter has to say about Agile development. And then I'll show you a little bit of a more modern approach and some tools and techniques. And then on Monday in class, we'll go over again some of the newer stuff. Okay, so we're kind of setting the groundwork in this case. Okay. Only if I can get the slides, but there we go. Okay, so this idea of agile software development, okay, it came about because the existing way, the heavyweight method of doing things, is really a relic of a different age in some respects. Okay, if you think now especially, Agile's been out for a while. It seems like it was in the early 2000s, maybe this stuff came out. The book has for sure. I should have looked that up, but anyway, but it's been out there a while. But we're moving away from the strict corporate structure of software development into the more stereotypical nowadays of the looser conglomerations of programmers, and you see this in a wide range of things. If you've watched Zoe's Infinite Playlist or whatever that's called, that show shows the current software development workplace, okay, where people are either working remotely, especially with COVID, we're seeing a lot of that. But even more than that, even if you're working in the same space, it's a move away from individual offices and a move toward shared spaces. So everyone will have their laptop. It's typically a MacBook, but I guess that may vary by company, which they take with them all the time. And then they can move from place to place to either desks that have big monitors and nicer keyboards or whatever they have, or meeting rooms or individual meeting rooms or whatever, or just isolation rooms if you want to get away from it all. But it's that change in atmosphere that's in part driven by the way now that we're software projects that we're developing. I mean, most people are not going to develop Microsoft Word. They're going to develop smaller projects or more niche products, I would say. So we're seeing that happen. So we're seeing less structured top-down management and more self-management. That's where kind of Agile comes from, okay? So here's the manifesto. There's a whole bunch of things on the manifesto that we may talk about in class, but here's kind of an overview here, that this is from one of the developers of it, that we're looking at better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it, okay? But here's the real difference between between this and existing tools at the time. It's individuals and interaction are given priority over processes and tools, okay? As we'll see as we go through, and we will go through the unified process, it produces a lot of artifacts, as we would say, a lot of documents, okay? There's a value to these documents in that they allow us to make sure we're on the right track and have some historical kinds of things, but they come at the cost of being slow. So Agile is saying we're going to, where we can, move away from processes and tools and move toward individuals and interactions, okay? One of the other big focuses is to not do the comprehensive documentation, but instead have the software itself work so well that you don't need much documentation, okay? It's also a big move away from contract negotiation business type dealings to customers being part of the team. So customers are involved from the start, okay? And also where Agile really comes in is that it's going to embrace change that change happens on all plans or all, no matter how you're doing it, but it's going to be very change positive and try to minimize the effects that change has. So it's not following a plan, it's every day moving and changing to make the goal work. Okay. So again, the agility from a standpoint here, we're saying that, and nobody is anti-agility, if that makes sense. So even those who work at very traditional software development companies and use the old methods are still trying to be as agile as they can. And when you think of agile, think of like a cat is agile, right? It can change direction quickly, it can speed up quickly, things like that. Okay. So the definition the book gives here is that it's effective response to change. So agility is all about change. If you knew in advance exactly what the product was going to be, you wouldn't have to worry about agility, right? You could just plow right through and it would be fine. Okay. Also, agility in the sense of this development methodology means effective communication among all stakeholders. Stakeholders are pretty much everybody that has anything to say, either customers or users or other developers, business executives, whatever. Okay. Again, the customer becomes part of the team. You organize the teams, and then the teams are in control. And there typically are not a lot of leader positions, at least not continual leadership positions, that allow them to do their own thing as they see fit, moving toward the bigger goals. Okay. So all this yields more rapid development, at least that's the theory, and incremental development of the software. So you get a lot of versions of things. Okay. So this graph is interesting. We talked about this a little bit in class, just that the idea that if there's a change, when it comes in the process is going to make a difference. When you're in the requirements gathering phase, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will next week, then changes are not a big deal. You're just getting things started. Okay. But when the later change comes in the development process, then there's a nonlinear growth in the cost to that system. And I'm not sure if I mentioned in this class or the other class, but I was once working on a project doing a pricing system for a health insurance company that I was working for. And I went through, I'd never had any computer courses at all. So I had no idea of software engineering, but I basically was on my own and I gathered what I thought were the correct documentation, made it all the way through the process, talking to all the people involved, only to find out at the demo meeting for the bigger boss that I had not been aware of a whole entire line of business. And it meant basically that my 6 months of work or whatever it was useless. I had to start over again. Okay. So you see in this graph that the darker line is going to be the conventional software processes. That's the unified process. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Okay, where the agile processes have the claim, and it's kind of hard to verify in some ways, that it's still going to be worse the later it is, but it's not as bad as if it were a traditional system. Okay. And by looking for and embracing change, you certainly can see that there would be an advantage to that. Okay. I think the absolute worst case scenario, when I was a programmer for a university, the system that we had, it was all internal programming. We would have a unit tell us what they wanted. We would translate it into whatever terms or tweak it or whatever. They had to sign off. That's what they wanted. And that's what they gave them. That's what the programmers gave them. It didn't matter if that worked for them. It didn't matter if their needs changed. We had a signed contract, and that whole adversarial us versus them, you said this, that's what you're going to get is not overly productive. And it led to not good software. Okay. So the process of agile development starts with, instead of the use case scenarios and use case diagrams, which we're going to talk about as part of the unified process, it talks about these user stories, is what they call them. Okay. So those are customer descriptions of what's required. They're scenarios. They're not in any particular form. Okay. The agile process will also know that all plans are short-lived, that everything's going to change. They accept change, they expect change. And they're really going to go through a lot of iterations of the software. Okay. So these multiple software increments. Okay. And it is true without a doubt. And if I sound skeptical of Agile, I'm not particularly. There are a lot of good things to say here. I think that we have to make sure that we use it properly, and that anything that's a fad can be overdone for sure. Okay, but this adapting as changes occur by showing the customer more versions of the software is 100% a good idea. Okay, so here are all the principles they give here. Okay, and you can read those. We're not going to go through all those today. But you basically see that it's all about collaboration. It's all about building little bits, little bits of the code to get it working. And it says here, early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Okay. Then here are the other principles that we have here. Okay. So one of the big factors we have here, not only in this, but we're going to see this again, and I believe it's the next chapter, is the human factors involved. Okay. If you give me a strong team of programmers with the right skills and the right motivation, I don't care what methodology that you make me use as far as the software development process or software engineering process, I'm going to get the job done. It's going to be good software. At the same time, if you give me either poorly skilled or poorly motivated or not the right mix of workers on a team, then it also doesn't matter what technology you're going to, or what methodology you're going to use. You're not going to have success. Okay. So what Agile tries to do, it's going to mold the process to the needs of the people and not enforce that. Okay. So with that, it's going to try to let the teams work the way they can work. And again, that's probably better than forcing them to work in a way that they don't work. But there's still no guarantee that you have the right team. Having the right team is really important. Someone who's a really good team member in some situations could be a really bad team member in other situations. Okay. So there's some key traits we have to have with Agile teams. The Agile teams, since they're self-directed, are going to have it requires more abilities on the team members. Okay, so we have competence, we have a common focus, collaboration, decision-making ability, fuzzy problem-solving ability, which means they can look at problems not just in black and white, but find complex solutions, mutual trust and respect, and self-organization. So you can see there are clearly lots of people in this world who do not have these skills, and that can be a difficult thing to go with. Okay. And one of the big things that came out of this movement, or at least got adopted by this movement, is this idea of extreme programming. Okay. This book is a little bit old. I think it's 2015. There's a new version that just came out, not enough time for us to use, version 9. But this book is really the book. This Pressman book is pretty much the book everybody uses. Okay. So at this point, I think extreme programming was a newer thing, so we make a bigger deal of it maybe than he would in later versions. I haven't looked at 9 yet, haven't got my copy yet. Okay, but the idea behind extreme programming is a sound idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I would like us to do an example of that if we can. If I can figure out either we bring enough laptops or something on one of our Fridays. Okay, but again, it starts with this idea of a user story. You ask the user, how do you see this software working? Okay, so the team then will assess each story and it assigns a cost to it. And we'll look at some techniques we're going to do for that. Okay, so these stories are then grouped together. That becomes a stage in the process. That's a deliverable increment. When we talk about deliverables, I don't know if I've defined that term. It means it's a physical something. It could be virtual, of course, but it's a document. It's a picture. It's a piece of code. It's not just a concept. Okay. Next, there's a commitment to a delivery date. And then we go through increments. When's the first increment done? Then the second increment done. That will give us fairly early on a project velocity. That means how long it's taking for us to develop we're doing so many user cases per week. Okay, so we can then project out when the other increments are likely to be. Realizing, of course, that we often have more complex development as we go along. Okay. So some other things here is that with this XP design, extreme programming design, we're going to have the keep it simple principle. Okay, we're going to use CRC cards, which we'll talk about more in chapter 8 later this week. Okay, and then if there's a difficult problem, then we're going to create these spike solutions. Okay, we're going to create design prototype, maybe more than one, to see how that kind of works. Okay, it also is going to put in refactoring into every phase. Okay, and I'm not sure if you've seen refactoring or not. Refactoring is the idea that you're refining the internal structure of your program. and you may have seen this or not, and we probably don't do enough of this as a general rule when we're teaching programming. Just because your program works doesn't mean that it's a good program, doesn't mean that it's well designed. We're often under pressure to get it done. This is the process of going back and making sure the code is strong, making sure that it makes sense, make sure that it's expandable and maintainable, okay? And then we get to what people think of most when they think of extreme programming. It's the idea of the coding standards, okay? And this gets into test first design, which is another way to look at it. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I wish we did this more in our programming courses. It's the idea that you have unit tests, what the input's going to be, what the output should be, before you even start coding. Okay, so you'll know when you're done. You know if you're getting close. Okay, it also encourages pair programming. With pair programming, there's one keyboard and two people that are viewing the code, and by doing that, you reduce errors. You have more than one way to look at it, and you can make sure that any coding standards, and coding standards are a big part of this, are going to be maintained. Okay, so it's just helpful. If somebody forgets something, somebody else is right there. Right? And I've done this before in the past, and I've managed people to do this, and it can be a very effective way to do things. Okay, and then the testing again, because testing is a big deal. Again, the unit test. We're not talking about for big giant pieces of the program. We're talking about the little part that you're working on. Okay, we're going to test those daily. Okay, and then there'll be some acceptance tests. Let us know that things are done and ready to be moved on. Okay, then that's going to assess the customer visibility functionality there, make sure that the customers are on board. Okay, so here's how this kind of works. We start with the planning. That's with the user stories. We're going to give some idea of the value of this particular user story. We're going to rank those by how important they are. We're going to make sure we have the acceptance test criteria, which means we know what the customer is expecting there. And then we'll have our iteration plan. What are we going to do on this iteration? Okay, we then move to design using CRC cards and spike solutions. We then move into the coding, which is typically on pair programming. Okay, and we're also going to be doing refactoring every time. Once we get stuff work, we're going to make sure it works well. We're then going to move to the testing phase. Now, notice we're doing testing all the time. So we also get the continuous integration as part of the coding part. We go to testing, the unit testing and the acceptance testing. Okay. Then we release the software increment. Okay. We calculate the project velocity at every iteration to see if it's getting better or worse. We can then make projections. Okay. So there's also this idea of industrial extreme programming. Okay. So it's going to be more of a combination. It's going to be more for bigger organizational units. So it's going to include expanded customer roles, upgraded technical practices, more hands-on management in some ways. Okay, so with this, it's going to go through these 6 new practices: the readiness assessment, the project community, the project chartering, test-driven management, retrospectives, and continuous learning. Okay, and that's going to be the process that it goes through. Okay. We now get to Scrum, which more than extreme programming, I think Scrum is what has defined modern Agile development. And we'll see some things in a minute that'll give us more information on that. And the project that I worked on a couple of summers ago with 100% Scrum. Okay. So the Scrum word, if you're not familiar, it comes from rugby. It's where everybody kind of mushes together and they throw the ball in the middle and they kick it around. So I'm not sure what that has to do with software development. Okay. But the big thing here is that the development work gets divided into packets, okay, or projects or whatever you want to call them. There's then a backlog that's maintained of that, okay, and then you're going to pick from those. The testing and documentation are ongoing, okay, so you test all the time. You create the documentation as you go, okay. The big thing here is that you're going to work in sprints. You have this backlog of existing requirements. Those get added to as change happens, but you're going to define a sprint. The sprint will be for some period of time. It's a week sometimes, 2 weeks sometimes, whatever it is. Okay. And you're going to make sure, or going to try to get done all of the tasks, all the packets or whatever you want to call it that are on that sprint to give a deliverable. Okay. Meetings are very short, and it says here it says here conducted without chairs, but they're often called standing meetings. The idea being that if you're standing, you're not going to just goof around very often. Okay, meetings are necessary, but they're awful. They always waste a lot of time, and certainly by having standing meetings, you can certainly make that go a little easier. Okay. Scrum often has daily stand-ups. They'll say where everybody every morning will get together, and even if it's inter Scrum, so they're not done with the Scrum that they're on, they will meet just to see what's going on, see if they can work out any issues. Okay. And then the demos are being delivered to the customer on a regular basis, and they're able to move things through. Okay. And that's a really crappy looking picture. Okay. But that is in the book. Okay. So we'll have to, you can look at that in the book and see how we're going through these processes here. Okay. So another method here is a dynamic system development method, the DSDM. Okay. There's a whole consortium to work on this, as there often are. Okay. It's similar in many ways to extreme programming, and here are their guiding principles. Again, we're seeing the same kind of deal. We're seeing that the teams are making their own decisions, which is important. They have the frequent delivery of products, all of that stuff. Okay. Some differences you see there is that you have this fitness for business purpose. Really is a bigger deal, I think, than we see in other agile methodologies. Okay. And it's very interesting that all changes during development are reversible, which is an odd feature in some ways. Okay. But again, similar kind of thing. Again, a not very good picture of that, but it is in the book. Okay. We also have Agile Modeling. Okay. So this is a set of Agile modeling principles. So we're going to model with a purpose. We're going to use multiple models. The travel light, that's the thing. We're not going to make these big ponderous models. In fact, Ambler talks about your models and the tools shouldn't be any more than barely good enough. Okay, so you don't want to make this beautiful, perfect model. If so, you took too much time. Okay, content's more important than representation, and know the models and tools you use to create them, and then adapt locally. Okay. There's also the Agile unified process. The unified process is the big old school thing that we talk about, where UML comes in. But this Agile unified process is somewhat of a combination, okay? And each iteration is going to go through the modeling, implementation, testing, deployment, configuration, project management, and environmental management. Okay, so it's just more of a quicker way to do the unified process. Okay. And that gets us through what the book has to say there on Agile. Okay, and I did want to show you one other source that we will talk about class, if I can get to it. Oh, I guess I have to go back there and then do that and go over here. Okay. And this website here is at Atlassian, is a company that has become really involved in this whole Agile software development. I did a quick survey of former students who are using, who are software engineers or software developers or programmers or whatever. I did this on Facebook, and pretty much to a person, they're all using the Atlassian products. The product we're going to talk about later and use, called Jira, is certainly the #1 project management tool that's currently being used. Okay. So this website, and I've posted a link to it on Moodle, it's very interesting. It's the modern day. This is what the industry standard is as far as the software and the techniques. Okay. And this Agile Coach is an interesting resource in that it's giving a lot of information, not just about their products, but about the Agile process development in general. Okay. And, and it goes through the Agile Manifesto here. It's going to go give us all the origin stories, all the different points in a different way to look at that. Okay. So this is different from our textbook, and it's certainly worth reading through this to have a better understanding. And again, when you hear me keep saying that Agile is important, it means Agile is important on the test. So these are things we need to be looking at for sure. Okay. So here's Scrum, which we've talked about before. Okay. And what I like about this is that there are these videos they've produced, okay, on what is Scrum, and they go through, I think there are 4 videos there that you can look at, okay, that are very worthwhile. As far as, and they're all pretty short, like 5 to 7 minutes, it seems like, that explain different parts of the Scrum process. Okay. In addition, there are lots of articles here. Okay. And there's the stand-ups, the daily meetings. There's, what are the different roles, all that. Okay. And then here's how, when we get to our software that we're going to use, that we're actually using the Jira software, some ways to do that. Okay, so lots of stuff there. Now, one thing the book doesn't talk about that's also important is called Kanban. Okay, and Kanban, why is that not popping up there? It's very interesting. Let me close that, see if that helps. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not popping that up. Let me go back to, well, I go here, then go here. Oh, this wasn't on a real thing yet. Okay, so again, it's Kanban. At first glance, to me, it seemed like this was just kind of a silly idea. But then when I actually used it for a couple of classes, I really see the point here, okay, that there really is a great value to be had, okay? And the book doesn't talk about it, but these videos do. So I'm going to request that you watch these videos. I think there are 4 of these as well. They're pretty short also, okay? And this is stuff that I expect you to know, okay? So we'll talk about this again more in class. We may watch a little of the videos, okay? But the what is, like I show a picture there. Yeah, what people often do these physically. I mean, they'll have little sticky notes, little square sticky notes they'll put on a board. And what it does, you put on each sticky note a task, which should take you about 6 to 8 hours, is where you start at to finish, okay? You can then move them through the different stages, okay? So you have, they're the backlog, and then they're in progress, or maybe they're waiting on somebody else, or wherever they're at, and then finally they're done, okay? And these videos do a good job of explaining through that. Okay, so what's the, you can see them kind of in the background of the picture over his left shoulder, and over also both sides show kind of what's happening here. Okay, so they can either be done through a physical board or through some products. In fact, the picture I was just on showed the Jira software and what it does. Okay, so in this case, we have the to-do list for, here's the team members of the board. Okay, we then have the ones that are in progress and the ones that are done. Okay, and each of these is going to have a description of it. It's going to be ranked in some way. Who's it assigned to? What kind of a time frame is there? And all those things. Okay, and these can be pretty useful. We'll talk about those more in class on Monday. Okay, and I think that is it for the moment. Okay, I think that this there's a lot of stuff here. So there really is a lot of information available at this Atlassian Agile Coach site. Okay, I want you to take a look at. Okay, then the last thing, hopefully make it to the end of the video. I know students sometimes don't. I sent out an email about this, or a message about this also. And it's just that we've gotten through the preliminaries, and I always find it difficult in something like software engineering to get through those first couple of lectures. People don't have the book yet. You know, we're still trying to get our hands on everything, wrap our head around it. It can be difficult, but moving forward, I want to see less me lecturing and more us working through things as a team. Okay, that's going to require that you have the textbook. So hopefully you've got the textbook. If not, I assume there are probably online versions you can find or borrow one or do something. Okay, but it's important that you read before class. You'll note that on Moodle, I'm putting a label for every week. I'll do that on the weekend, hopefully, unless I forget. That's going to lay out which chapters we're doing. Okay, so this week we're going to do 5 and 6 on Monday, 7 and 8 on Wednesday, and 9 and 10 on Friday. Okay, and we'll try to throw an activity in there on Friday as well. Okay, and if we have to adjust our schedule, I mean, we're going to be agile in this class, right? If we have a snow day, or we have other problems or issues, or things take longer than we expect, then then we'll adapt. But that's going to be the goal. Okay. Again, so I'm not going to necessarily cover everything in the chapter in great detail. Okay, so that's what the new thing is. Okay, but you can ask questions. I'm going to encourage that. I'll probably take time specifically to ask in class, but if not, feel free to ask. Okay, so I'm going to highlight things from class or from the book. I'm going to amplify things from the book. We're going to work on projects and have discussions about it. But just because we don't cover it in class doesn't mean that you're not responsible for it as far as the homework and potential quizzes, and as far as the exams. Okay, as far as quizzes go, I don't love quizzes. No one loves quizzes. If most students are reading the materials most of the time, and I'll be able to tell, we'll all be able to tell, then there's not really a need for quizzes. It's a waste of our time. But if people are not reading, and there's only one person ever does the reading, then I will have to put some quizzes in there to encourage you to add that to your Kanban of weekly activities to make sure we're getting stuff done. Okay. And that's not meant to be, vindictive or whatever, but it's just for this course to work and for us to get the most out of it, it's required that we've done the reading before we get to class. Okay. Because you don't want me just to read the book to you and have story time. That's not really what we're doing at this level. Okay. If there are any questions about any of that, then make sure that you let me know. And again, the new schedule is there on Moodle. You take a look at, and we'll be looking at chapter 5 and 6 on Monday.